Kroganar lets Frederick take the lead, as the off-world Lemurian is definitely the most experienced of the two when it comes to these pods. Grabbing his trusty wrench and crowbar from the driver's door, he patiently watches the young man as he studies the charred capsule. Looking at the blackened exterior, Kroganar thinks that it held up pretty damn well. Not many star nations could claim that their spacecraft survived an unshielded atmospheric re-entry, with so little damage in the first place. The more technologically sophisticated nations would use typical magneto-shielding to keep the ridiculously hot plasma away from the hull, while the more pragmatically inclined nations would simply slap a few layers of ablative heat shielding on there and call it a day. Not this one, though. The odd, somewhat egg-like shape of the capsule surely raises a few questions for the reptilian, but Kroganar's mind is preoccupied with something else right now. Watching from a few paces behind, he tries to read Frederick's body language as the young man stares at the capsule. Is he happy to see something familiar again? Or is he perhaps thinking about possible comrades of his that died during his arrival here on Kavir? He could also just be lost in thought for a bit, trying to come up with a plan on how to dismantle that thing, or something along those lines. The fact is, the old warrior simply could not tell. He has a hard time getting a read on him, as Frederick does not only lack a tail, but his oddly shaped ears are also about as expressionless as possible for a mammal. He has not seen them make even the tiniest twitch in the last few days. And so, he simply keeps watching the young man, giving him some room for now. He is just glad to not be alone on the scrap job for once. A little bit of weirdness from his new friend is not going to change that. Got to keep in mind to ask him about that later, he reminds himself. Though after a while of simply standing there, Kroganar gets a bit concerned and trudges over to the young man, powdery snow crunching satisfyingly under his heavy steps. "Frederick?" he asks, his tone perfectly neutral, as always. The young man flinches from the large hand suddenly poking his shoulder from behind, turning to face Kroganar. "Ah, sorry. Got lost in think," he apologizes, brushing part of his mane out of his face and scratching the back of his head. "No problem," Kroganar rumbles. "You just went quiet for a bit, so I thought I'd better check if you are all right," he explains. "Are you all right?" "Yes, me all right." Frederick gives him an energetic thumbs up and a big smile. "Just think I maybe remember new thing about how we arrive here, a few seconds ago, was interesting," he explains, walk and talking with Kroganar to the escape pod. As they arrive at the still closed hatch, Frederick turns around and puts his hands behind his back as he gives Kroganar a quick rundown of things. "Okay, this is typical getaway capsule. White part is sort of fabric that cover almost everything. Black part is actually many small tile put together for keep hot away from inside." Kroganar nods along. "That sounds about right." "This part." Frederick keeps explaining the general structure of the pod to him, pointing out potentially interesting points and components that he thinks might be more valuable than others, also telling him which areas to better leave alone if they both still want to exist later. At least, that is what he thinks he tried to tell him. The algorithm is doing a great job at building a completely new database from the ground up, but sometimes those translations are a bit out there. If he remembers right, the translator's words were, "Big boom, not good, very dead. Part of you here, part of you over there. Not good time, not good idea." Apparently, whoever built this thing thought it would be a great, absolutely genius idea to put a bunch of explosives inside of an escape capsule. Madness. Absolute madness. Though, according to Frederick, there is a valid reason for that. Kroganar highly doubts that. Thankfully, Frederick makes remembering all of it a lot easier by actually marking the spots he is talking about on the hull with a marker he took from one of the toolkits, using big circles and a couple of X's to signify what to scrap and what to better leave alone as he talks about them. It kind of reminds Kroganar of the intercultural lectures he happily attended back on Camorra, when he was still a strapping young warrior, scales shining brightly and eager to learn everything about those newly discovered and uplifted forearm mammalians, calling themselves Kiroans. But that was almost a lifetime ago. Right now, he is making sure to keep everything Frederick tells him in his mind, and his experience is slowly starting to kick in, as he starts to see the similarities to the kind of engineering he has gotten used to over time. Soon enough, they are both engaged in pleasant technical talk, even exchanging a bit of knowledge here and there, as they go over the pod one more time. "Any more question?" Frederick asks him after they are done. "No, that should be everything for now," Kroganar replies, hefting his heavy-duty circular saw with a bit of anticipation. "Good luck then," Frederick tells him in English, slipping inside the pod. Staying true to their deal from earlier, Kroganar simply lets Frederick go ham on the inside, as he keeps on cutting away parts of the hull to get to the juicy innards, occasionally taking a glance at the various things Frederick pulls out of the capsule, as he happily presents them to the old man. After seeing the pod in person, he is glad that Frederick volunteered to take care of the inside. The armoured giant doubts that he even would have been able to fit inside to begin with, let alone stand upright or do any kind of work in that tin can. But he has to give it to the people who built this. They certainly knew what they were doing. As he keeps tearing away layer after layer, his respect for their ingenuity keeps growing. Rarely has he seen such well thought out layouts and frames, cramped together in such tight spaces. It seems like everything is there for a good reason. Kroganar is also starting to have a sneaking suspicion that Frederick might not have been completely lying to him when he said that his people had managed to go to space, if not without a bit of help. The letters and glyphs on the parts he is ripping from the capsule's cold, charred corpse are awfully familiar to those he has seen the young man use to write down words in the past, and he also seems very knowledgeable about its construction. Maybe they were uplifted after all. Could he simply be just too prideful to admit it to him, then? That would certainly be a lot more likely. "Look, I even find new covering. No more have to wear old and damaged coverings," Frederick cheers, as he reappears from the capsule, showing off a neatly folded stack of various fabrics to Kroganar. "Good that you found something useful for yourself. Put them in the hatch to the left of the other one. That should be a lot cleaner." "All right." He gets back to work, and happily scrapes away while Frederick keeps flitting back and forth between the scraploader and the pod, having his hands full with other things every time he exits the wreck, only stopping twice to take a short break. The hours start to tick by as they happily scrap and loot to both their hearts' content, completely absorbed in their work respectively. "I think, my work complete, I have taken everything useful from inside, almost nothing left," Frederick proudly declares, walking up to him with a tired but satisfied smile. Kroganar grunts in agreement, gesturing at the completely torn apart escape pod with his saw. "Same for me, except for some small parts that I am not sure of if they would even be worth scrapping." "Oh? Which part?" Frederick curiously asks. "Any kind of electronics or computing components. If this really is as uncommon technology as I think it is, nobody will be able to program them. Not in these parts, at least." "Makes sense," Frederick muses. "We go back to Cavalier L1 then?" he inquires, eager to head back and get some rest, after a good long day of good old-fashioned manual labour out in the cold. Kroganar looks to the horizon, mood souring a little, as he spots the literal wall of dark grey clouds in the direction they will be heading. "Maybe not," he frowns. "Let me check the radar for a moment." They both walk over to the scraploader, and Kroganar hands Frederick his tools. "Here, take those and put them back. I'll go check on the radar." "Okay." Frederick takes the comically large tools from him, and doesn't even break a sweat as he quickly puts them into their respective spots, closing the hatches and joining Kroganar in the cockpit after he is done. "So, radar say good thing?" he asks, scooting over to take a look at the slightly scratched up screen. Kroganar grumbles, definitely not happy. "No. The radar did not warn us about that storm front forming up, and it has gotten too big by now. I would not want to risk going through there if we do not have to." "Oh, man." Frederick slumps into his seat. "I agree, this is very irritating," Kroganar agrees, looking out of the window and back at the screen. "I do not know why it did not warn us. A storm this big should have triggered a warning hours ago." Leaning back into the driver's seat, Kroganar closes his eyes in an attempt to keep the fire inside of him in check. This would be an incredibly stupid reason to use up one of his last blood rages. Taking a deep breath and exhaling through flaring nostrils, he opens his eyes again and turns to Frederick. "We will have to spend the night out here." He agrees emotionlessly, simply accepting the fact. "We will also have to make some preparations. The storm looks to be at least a 5. He points to the radar screen. "A 5? Frederick asks, trying to guess what that might mean. "From out of 10. It is a rating we have developed," he explains, confirming Frederick's hunch. "Here on Cavit, even a 2 can kill you if you do not know what you are doing. It gets extremely cold during a storm out here." "Wow," Frederick blurts out, both impressed and equally intimidated. He wonders what rating the storm he endured in his pod might have been. Maybe, 3 then? If a 2 can kill you. "A 4 can knock vehicles over," Kroganar continues. "A 6 is able to damage structures. An 8 will definitely do major damage to anything. And a 10 is almost certain death for everything and everyone topside. Luckily, I've never even heard of a 10 even being seen." Frederick swallows heavily, knowing what tornadoes are able to do back on Earth. He does not want to find out what they are capable of here. "No thanks. I'm good being alive." "Okay. So what is have to do?" he asks, trying to be of use. Kroganar briefly thinks about it, recalling the checklist he made with Dushavie. "We will have to strap down everything tight on the flatbed, and put some debris covers on the windows. We also have to put some covers on the engine intakes and anchor the vehicle to the ground." "I get. What is I supposed to?" "You can take care of the intakes and the debris covers. You can find them in the big compartment to the rear. I will go over the flatbed and then anchor us to the ground," he instructs. "And if one gets done before the other, he will help other." Frederick finishes the sentence for him, taking things very seriously. "Exactly." Kroganar nods, his opinion of the odd Lemurian steadily increasing. They both get to work, and Frederick hops out of the cockpit, already feeling the breeze picking up a bit, which might also just be a classic case of placebo. But it certainly does wonders in keeping him on his toes. Not wasting any time, he power walks to the rear and looks for the cargo hatch with the engine covers in them, quickly finding it. He turns the handle and pulls the access door open, taking out the covers and swiftly placing them in their spots, making sure that they are really stuffed in there. After double and triple checking the intakes, he briskly walks back to the rear and takes out the pieces of window-shaped wire mesh, securing them in place with the turn of a few carefully placed handles. Kroganar actually helps him with the biggest one, the one for the windshield. "That should be everything." Kroganar sighs, relieved. "Did we forget any cargo boxes?" Both briefly scan the vicinity of the scrap loader, thankfully finding nothing amiss. "Good. Let us get inside. There is no use in staying outside any longer." "Yeah, I bet on that," Frederick agrees, thinking aloud in English, definitely not imagining the wind having picked up by now. He climbs into the scrap loader, firmly closing the door shut with a solid thud. "And now we wait," Kroganar sighs, rummaging through a glove box of sorts. "Feel free to eat and rest. There is little else we can do right now, he explains, handing Frederick a cheap ration. Here, this should be edible for you. Thanks. Frederick takes it hesitantly, taking a look at the unmarked silvery plastic wrapper. Crocodile tears open his own, identical ration, and takes a begrudging bite out of the unshapely brick of nutrients. Edible, he grumbles, chewing on the tasteless lump. Not much more than that. Staring at the literal brick of food in his hands, Frederick thinks back to his time in the military. He ate a lot of similar stuff during those 9 months of mandatory service, and boy oh boy did his fresh out of uni self not like those. With his mind somewhere else, he takes his first apprehensive bite out of it, not really bothered by something like that anymore. Surviving a frozen hellscape really changes a man, he chuckles, swallowing the pasty chunk. Do you want some water? Crocodile hands him a metal bottle. It helps wash it down. Sure, thank. Frederick accepts it, taking a big sip. The two men silently sit in the cockpit, both crunching on their dry-ass ration bars, and thinking about the many, many things they would rather be doing than waiting out a storm in a cramped cockpit, stuck out in bumfuck nowhere, chewing on a kilo brick of plaster. How long we have wait? Frederick breaks the silence, staring at the setting suns on the horizon with a faraway expression. Crocodile grumbles in thought, looking at the radar as he keeps chewing. I would guess somewhere between 6 and 10 hours. That center looks hard to predict. He points at the screen. Frederick doesn't notice him doing so, though. He is still staring at the sunsets. 10 hours? Frederick whines, at which Crocodile simply nods. We are going to be here for a while, yes. Does your people have a way of passing time? The reptilian inquires. Frederick lets out a dry laugh, looking back at the old warrior. We have many ways of pastime. Play games, tell a story, and so further. I'm not tired enough and need sleep anyway, so we can try a few if you want. Good. Crocodile lets out a deep, satisfied rumble. I have been meaning to ask you a few things.